Um, well, hi everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. I don't want to take too long. I've got about 20 or 30 slides, but I'll try to move through them fairly quickly. And I guess I just want to say it's always amazing that there's this many people talking about Medicaid on a Tuesday night in Indiana, and I'm just excited to be able to be a part of this conversation. So. Tracy and Lakshmi wanted me to talk a little bit about some of the navigation process, and a lot of this is sort of through the redetermination, through the appeals process, and what that might look like. And so I will go ahead and go from here. Okay, so just really quickly, for those of you who don't know me, I was previously at Indiana Legal Services for about 16 years first as a staff attorney, then as the director of advocacy. I left full-time about a year ago to start the Indiana Justice Project. We do a lot of the same work as our legal aid friends, but just with a little bit of a different set of tools. So we're statewide law and policy. We focus primarily on health and economic justice, and in that bucket is Medicaid coverage, Medicaid expansion, especially for immigrant populations, and then looking at also housing and especially housing as a social determinant of health and how we can do better on that in Indiana. And our mission is essentially equal justice and opportunity for all Hoosiers. I have a lot of hyperlinks in this presentation, so afterwards I edited a little bit more, Lakshmi, so I'll send you the sort of the final version that you can share with folks that will have plenty of links. We do our work through some policy analysis and recommendations, legislative and administrative advocacy. Tracy mentioned the work requirement stuff earlier. We do file litigation when it's necessary and when other avenues are not available to resolve issues. We do a lot of public education. We work in coalitions, and we also do what we can to make records public for people to be able to review and sort of make their own decisions about policy programs. So as any good lawyer would do, I'm going to start with a bunch of caveats about what I'm about to talk about. And so I will go through these and just sort of explain sort of the lens or sort of how I'm approaching this conversation. So first of all, Medicaid is complex. Tracy, there's actually 38 categories of Medicaid. So you were off by 3. But they each with their own sort of set of rules and set of set of requirements. And just really quickly, it seems bizarre that we'd have that many, but when you think about how it's a program that sort of over time Congress straps on new pieces to it, whether or not it's, first it was Medicaid that was just for the elderly and then the disabled, and then we had the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, and then we had the big Medicaid expansion and all sorts of other categories. So it's been sort of this thing that we've added on, these refugee assistance and whatnot. The second thing is that with that complexity, the rules can be very tricky. The good news is you don't need to know all of the rules of Medicaid in order to help folks. What you kind of need to know is where to find the rules and where to find the answers to those rules, and that's part of what we'll be talking about. For instance, I was in preparation today, I was looking through the income rules. Turns out plasma donations are counted as earned income. So I did not know that until today. So it's that important that they include that in the rules for income, and you have to that counts against your eligibility. So today is, like I said, today is sort of a framework for advocacy, a framework for thinking about if you are a Medicaid member, if your family member is on Medicaid, or if you're a volunteer who helps people with Medicaid related issues. This is something for you to sort of have a framework to think about these questions. And everyone's situation is different. I like to think that, especially when I was sort of in my early days of handling cases, Medicaid cases, it was one of the situations where if you've seen one Medicaid case, you've really just seen one Medicaid case. There's so much variation depending on income, especially for folks who are sort of on the lower end of the income spectrum, that they, income can be ad hoc, it can be improvised, it can be a side hustle, it can be all sorts of things. And so thinking about how to sort of navigate that is to think about how to put the rules in place as you're sort of moving forward. I will also caveat that I know, by knowing who's on this call, that there are folks in this room that are doing navigation on behalf of folks who are representing people as authorized representatives. So I want to sort of shout that out. First of all, you don't need to be an attorney to do this sort of work. You can do it as just as a friend, including appeals. And so I would like it if folks have things to share, that please feel free to chime in and speak up. I'd be happy to have you contribute. Okay. So here are the key takeaways, and I like this. This came from HHS, Health and Human Services Agency, and this is how they've sort of described, as you are a citizen in a state in the U.S., what you ought to know to sort of make sure that folks can stay on the Medicaid that they are eligible for. The first one is update contact information. This can't be stressed enough. So much of what we think is probably happening is people are not responding to packets because they're not getting the packets. The second is respond. Always respond to anything you get. Immediately look at it, immediately review it. Don't just set it down and say, well, I don't need to worry about that. This is tough because we get so busy and we get so much junk mail that it's hard to understand. And quite frankly, the letters from Medicaid are inscrutable in so many situations. Another really key thing here is parents. You may get a notice saying that you are not eligible anymore, but the rules are different for kids. The rules are different for folks who are under the age of 19. So even if you think you aren't eligible, your kids may still be eligible for Medicaid. So don't just say, oh gosh, I got a notice saying that I'm over income for this category of coverage. I guess I'm not going to respond. If your kids are still covered, then you should know that. And by the way, I'm not able to see the chat right now. I see some little bumps coming in, but Lakshmi or Tracy, feel free to interrupt me as I go if there's something that you think I should hit on as I'm talking. And finally, you should consider all other coverage options. So Medicaid is not the end of the story, especially when it comes to income. Even Medicaid, you may not be qualified for one category, you could be switched into another category, but I think more importantly, thinking about healthcare.gov, thinking about the marketplace, and thinking about potentials for employer-sponsored coverage are really important. Okay. A quick note, I thought it was important just to talk really, really quickly about this, because oftentimes I'll talk to folks and they'll say, well, what's your health coverage? And they'll say Anthem or CareSource or MHS, because that's who often sends them a lot of letters about their healthcare. But that is managed care, which is essentially FSSA is the eligibility determiner. They're the big payor, but within that they contract with managed care to actually deliver the healthcare services. And the way that works is the Family and Social Services Agency basically pays a per member rate to the managed care companies. Not surprisingly, Anthem is by far the largest in the state and covers the most people. Okay. Eligibility renewal requirements. So the COVID protections that Tracy mentioned, they're unwinding. What we know is that for everybody that was protected at that time, before they are terminated from coverage, they must go through their case must go through some sort of review. Indiana has 12 months to begin that renewal, which they began March or April. I think that technically was it technically March? I have to go back and look at the notes, but they'll have several more months into 2024 before we see the end of the renewal process in Indiana. Some states, I think at least one state, haven't even actually started the renewals yet, which is kind of amazing. So during the course of the pandemic, Indiana still did redeterminations for everybody. They just didn't take action. So if they looked at your case and they said, well, clearly this person looks like they're over income, it would sort of flag you as being what they call PHE only protected. So you have this like protected status, but that's a group of folks that they expect would not be eligible, but for the maintenance of effort that we've talked about during COVID, the federal requirement. Warning notices go to those individuals who are deemed eligible due to PHE only, with a notice of actions will follow. And generally, 45 days before the action's taken, folks should be getting their renewal packets. That's obviously not always going to happen, but that's generally when they're supposed to be sending them out. So what are the big things that affected eligibility that changed? Tracy already mentioned Medicare. So turning 65, becoming eligible for Medicare if you became disabled. Changes in family size. It's been 3 years, so folks have come into the house. Folks have gone out of the house. Increases in assets and increases in income. Those are sort of the really big ones. And then folks just leaving the state of Indiana. Those are sort of the big pieces of eligibility criteria that would lead to a person either not being eligible or having a new category of coverage. Redeterminations are typically done annually on sort of a 12-month basis. And it is really just to review and determine if a person is still eligible. Financial eligibility, they'll look at income, and they'll look at what they call resources. And this kind of depends on what category of coverage you have. In addition to that, the FSSA, because we are in the era of modern, sophisticated technology systems that never fail and always get everything right, they do data sharing with other agencies, the federal agencies, other state agencies, that they can sort of look at to see, oh, you're on Social Security. We have our system ping that there's a data match there. And if FSSA has enough information, it may determine that a member is still eligible for Medicaid. And actually, they're supposed to do that. They're supposed to always try to say, can we make a determination based on what we got in our file, and then not bug somebody about whether or not they need to provide information. We call these ex parte renewals, and by and large, Indiana is not the worst at these. Some states are just terrible at them, but our ex parte rate looks fairly good. I'm not sure why, but I'm not going to question it. It's right now it's working in the favor of folks who are working against terminations. And FSSA does, if they do not have enough information, they will send you a sort of a letter saying, we don't have enough information, please respond, and go from there. I linked that link to the bottom. It says the Medicaid policy manual, but it actually takes you straight to the redetermination process section of the manual. It's in plain English. It's pretty dense. There's a lot in there, but it's not super hard to read. So that sort of goes through a lot of the processes. All right, so just really quickly, a recap of that. The renewal process. Step 1, state's got everything they need. Great, we're good to go. You are auto renewed, as they say, or auto redetermined, or ex parte, however you want to call it. Step 2, state, we don't quite have all the information. We don't have your current income. We don't know if so-and-so is still living in the house. Here's what we're missing. Here are the 5 things that we still have. We don't need to re-verify your citizenship again. We have that information. You need to send us these 3 things that are still missing. And if so, we can then go ahead and process you. We don't process, you didn't respond to our notices. We don't process you. Or you did respond and we determined that you aren't eligible. You have a right to what's called a fair hearing. You have a right to appeal that decision and have a fair hearing before an administrative law judge. All right. This is where it gets fun. We get to look at some sample notices. So this is, and I pulled these straight from the state's unwinding page, but just to give you a sense about what you're looking at for those of you who have never looked at a Medicaid notice. This was the sort of the warning notice that was going out to folks, and I think it's still going out to folks. If you look up on the right, you'll see the names of the case number, the name, the assistance group number, and then when the notice was allegedly mailed. And then they have information about when your coverage is supposed to change, that sort of thing. So this notice was supposed to go out. This is not a eligibility determination notice. If you look down at, let's see, it's about right where the A in the sample letter word is. In a few weeks, you will receive a redetermination form from us. So this was kind of their way of saying, look out, it's coming, and get ready. All right, so here is an eligibility change notice. This is from somebody that I actually had received this from back in March. This is, it's a little strange because it looks like an auto renewal notice, and I think that's what you could describe it, but it does have some language in it that's a little annoying to me. If you look at the second line here under the first paragraph, he says, we were unable to auto redetermine you for an additional 12 months using current information in available electronic databases. Please review the information on the form. Well, if you look at the next page, it says, if all the information is correct, you don't need to respond to this notice. We will send you a notice with your new eligibility period information. So what is this? I'm not really sure. Should I appeal this? I don't really know. In theory, if you go through this and you look at all the information and it all looks correct, then you're good to go. But if you look through that information and it has, for instance, 5 people living in your house that don't live in your house, or it has income that is not accurate, then there are things that need to be changed. Then technically you need to go back and change those things and report them to the FSSA. So this is as close as I've seen to an auto renewal notice. If folks have actually seen one, I'd love to see it. They don't make those obvious, and maybe they just sort of send a very, very basic form that I'm missing. But this is as close as I've seen to an actual ex parte renewal notice, despite the fact that it says we are unable to auto redetermine you for an additional 12 months. Okay, so this is essentially the notice that says we need more information from you because right now we don't. If you don't send us that information, we won't have a sort of enough to go on, and you're going to be your coverage is going to be terminated. So important thing here to look at a few dates, and this is actually their sample notice from the landing page, the unwinding landing page from the FSSA. So you've got your mailing date on here. You've got your important information. Then it says, if you do not complete, sign, and return this form, your coverage will be discontinued effective March 1st. So you have an effective date of the coverage termination. And then you have essentially what they're looking for in terms of the information. You must include proof of your current income and resources with this form. This is for a notice that folks receive for a program other than HIP. HIP does not have a resource test. This is for HIP and Hoosier Healthwise do not have resource tests. This is for the traditional Medicaid Hoosier Care Connect that Tracy mentioned earlier. But again, it's very dense, but really that's sort of the key information you need here. And then down below, you see some more information about the portal. I've heard some not great things about the portal. I know folks on this call probably have had some experience with the portal being a pretty atrocious way to send information and update information. So they do have the portal, and they have new and exclamation point there. So they're very excited about the portal. Whether or not it's how useful it is remains to be determined, but there are several options to get the information back to the state. All right, very, very different looking form here. This is the health coverage form that folks who are on HIP would receive because it just requires a current income with the form. It doesn't require resources, assets. They don't care about that for the determinations that are made in the HIP program. Again, looking at the important information, case number, obviously the address of whoever this is getting mailed to, and then the effective date you see there on the notice as well. Okay, and this one, this is one where this was an interesting notice. This is like a notice that they are sending out. They're calling it the COVID-19 mailer. That's a lovely name. This is essentially the notice that they say we don't typically do review for folks, but we don't, or excuse me, or for these folks, but we don't think you're eligible any longer. We think your eligibility has expired. You were kept on because of the public health emergency. And then they give sort of these reasons. So pregnancy has terminated, in 12-month extension has expired. Assistance group members left the home. So they think that this is the information that they have on file for you, that they think would indicate that you have some sort of change in eligibility and you need to respond to this notice as well. All right. This is the second half of that notice. I just brought this part in. You'll get a final notice within 2 weeks about your coverage. If you are no longer eligible, you will get a final notice about 2 weeks before your coverage is scheduled to change. You can appeal that decision. You have appeal rights. Your coverage has not been changed at this time, so please, so give them as much information as you can before that time expires. This is the backside of those notices that that they have sent to folks. This is sort of like, so all those notices have these sort of like, this is where you sort of fill out your information and sort of let them know what your status is, that sort of thing. And then there's a due date on there. So please return this form and documents to us no later than February 20th, 2023. And don't forget to sign your form on the last page. So it's sort of the really big information. Unfortunately, these are easily missed dates because they're not as bolded and sort of obvious from the information shown. Okay, so that's the redetermination sort of packet notice process. After you submit that, so you submit it within the time they've asked, and you're going forward, they may request more information. They may request verification. They may send you the DFR form 2032, and this is the form that lists the categories of information requested, describes the kind of verification or proof they needed, and they don't give you a lot of time to respond to this. 13 days is typically what they will give you in order to get your response in, and that can obviously not be helpful. I included one so that if you ever see it, this is what it looks like. If you haven't before, it sort of lists so you'll see what we filled out. There will be a deadline that will be filled out, and it'll indicate what program it's for, and if it's for health coverage, it would indicate as such, and it would have all the information that you would need. By the way, this is, in case you're wondering, this is a 39-page form. I don't know if they're sending the entire form to folks, or if the caseworkers, if the FSA goes through and actually just gives you what they think you need to verify. But it is a very big form. But this is this is sort of the essential information that you need. And then if you see important information there, the application will be denied or current benefits discontinued unless a response is received by the deadlines specified above. All right, so let's say you get a redetermination packet, or you get a notice, you get some sort of indication from the FSA, and you're like, oh my God, what is what's going on? Or you get the determination notice, but you think it's done inaccurately. One thing you could do is you can contact the regional offices that oversee the DFR and try to get a hold of somebody through that process. If you're an authorized representative or if you're a Medicaid member, inquiry sent is okay. Technically, it's supposed to be within 3 to 5 business days. I don't know how fast they are right now in responding to these emails, but it's something to consider. I know that legal aid attorneys have often, in my estimation, have had a pretty good amount of luck getting through that process, but that may not be the case right now. But this is also, I think this is available on the website. But again, I'm going to send this out, so if you need access to this, you'll have it as well. Okay, so this is like the and I have to credit Amanda Hall for sending this to me, but this is essentially the eligibility. Like this is it. This is the final notice. This is the notice that says we're cutting off your coverage, and here are the reasons. This is actually an approval notice, but what you would see instead is we say your application for health coverage has been denied or has been terminated, effective, whatever date they have listed, and then they have to list the reasons for why. The reasons can be fairly generic: failure to cooperate, failure to provide verifications, or change in income or resources exceed program eligibility standards. That's sort of the general things that you'll see there. So in addition to trying to work things out via the process that we talked about in terms of contacting FSSA, working with maybe a navigator, what it may be, you have the right to appeal an adverse decision. That can even be like if you think that you've been put in the wrong category of coverage, you can appeal that. So you can essentially appeal anything that looks like it's sort of an adverse or negative action. This is probably the page that advocates right now are probably the least happy with when it comes to the FSSA. And there's a very, very good reason for that. And I'm going to ask if anybody wants to raise their hand and tell me why are we unhappy with this page? Anybody? Y'all see the reference to power accounts? All over this document, there's reference to power accounts, power account payments, power account contributions. You could lose your HIP Plus. You could lose your HIP Basic. All sorts of bad things can happen. Our accounts aren't in effect right now. They are not being used. They won't be back in effect until at least 2024. So this is like the crucial document that's supposed to tell people, here's how to vindicate your rights. Here's how to ask for hearings. Here's how to get all these things done. But unfortunately, there's all sorts of language in here that is completely irrelevant, and it's really, really problematic. I spoke to 2 Medicaid members last week, one of whom told me, well, I'm probably gonna lose my coverage because I haven't paid my power account payment in like 2 months. And I said, you haven't paid your power account payment in 3 years. And it doesn't matter that that's what it said on the notice. You do not have to make a power account payment. And another person just said he was just really confused. He had no idea what to do when he saw this notice because of all this language about power accounts. So this is frustrating right now. And we have expressed that frustration many times to the state about this. There's been some corrective action, but it's been not the greatest because these are still things that are showing up in notices right now. So I highlighted the things that are actually relevant, and that includes how to file your timely appeal. Must be done in writing by close of business within 33 days. Just a note, SNAP benefits, you can also do them. You can do your appeals for SNAP over the phone. So that's a little different. So just making sure, like if you've heard, oh, you can just appeal a FSSA decision over the phone, you cannot do that with Medicaid. It has to be done in writing. And then you should be able to continue your coverage. And the date of the appeal is 33 days from the date of the notice or the effective date of the action. You are appealing whichever is later. So that's essentially the time frame that you have to appeal it. And then below, there's sort of how to file the appeal. And I've got another slide that I think it does a good job of explaining that as well. Yeah, and so I highlighted the second, how will the appeal impact my benefits? If you submit your request for the appeal prior to the effective date or the change in your coverage listed in the notice, you will be able to receive the same level of benefits you are currently receiving while your appeal is pending. Okay. This is from the Office of Administrative Legal Proceedings. This is the agency that hears the appeals that come from the FSSA. And this is a nice little notice here that you can use. You check the boxes for what you're appealing, and you can use this to file your written appeal. You don't need to worry about. Sometimes I know that folks will think, well, should I give like every single reason why they are wrong and I'm right on that appeal notice? The reality is no, you could have that opportunity to explain the case to the ALJ, the administrative law judge later. This really is, in my opinion, it's the time just to sort of check all the boxes that you have timely appealed a determination. All right. So let's talk about that. So you're going to appeal. If you disagree with the FSSA's decision and you appeal it, you have the right to a fair hearing before an administrative law judge. Everybody has a right to a hearing. After filing the appeal, you'll get a case number. You'll have receive a written notice for the date and time for the hearing, and there will be call-in information. And when that happens, you call in. You don't wait for them to call you. There will be testimony and a chance to cross-examine the state's witness. You can present your arguments. You can explain why you think that you're right. You can be represented by legal counsel or an authorized representative. You can have a friend represent you, somebody that's knowledgeable in Medicaid. Hearings are supposed to be informal. It's not like being in court where you're sort of, a lot of sort of, one person talks at a time and you have to go through a whole process to present evidence and say why this document is to be submitted. Things are pretty low key. It's nice to be able to have a clean record where you can sort of understand what's actually happening if you end up going on to another level of appeal, and I'll talk about that in a second. But in general, you can get just about all of the exhibits you think you want to get. You can get those submitted. The decision that you receive will be in writing. It will be sent to you, and it should be sent to your representative as well, although don't necessarily rely on that. Sometimes it'll get sent to one person and not to the other. And then if you disagree with that decision, there are sort of further levels of review, but it gets a lot harder. This is really your chance at the administrative law judge hearing. If you think that the FSSA has screwed something up and it needs to be fixed, this is the place to do it, because this is where you get to present your evidence. You get to show, like, they're looking at my pay stub wrong, or they're not understanding this letter from my doctor, whatever it may be. By the time you get to the judicial review, or sort of higher level review, I would definitely advise having an attorney. And at that point in time, you're really just basing it on the record, and the judge is going to, and a court is going to say, I'm going to defer pretty hard to the agency that made this decision. That's probably where they're, they know this, they're sort of the experts, and I'm not going to sort of go back and look at the evidence in the same way that they would at the ALJ hearing. All right, so let's say that you lost eligibility for coverage and you want to get back on. Let's say you missed a deadline. You didn't get your documents in on time. You didn't do the verifications at the right time, or you missed some sort of deadline to appeal. If you file. If you contact them within 90 days, there's a federal rule that essentially says that you should be reinstated. It's without having to file a brand new application. So that's the quickest way to get yourself sort of back on the program. You can also do a reapplication. The problem with this can be, for certain programs, there is no retroactive coverage. So if you apply for and get onto Medicaid for the disabled, you get 3 months back of retroactive coverage. So if you apply in, October, they'll go back and cover bills that you had before in like July and August and September. That's not true for HIP. They've waived that period, that retroactive coverage period. So they're helpful for non-HIP members because of the 90 days retroactive coverage.
Adam, I'm just going to give you like a 2 to 5 minute warning to make certain we have time for Q&A. Is that going to work for you?
Oh, goodness. Yeah,
awesome.
I'm realizing I'm moving way too slow. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
All right. So I think this might actually be my last, two really quick slides. So if you're no longer eligible for Medicaid, what else can you do? Check to see if your employer has coverage. You didn't generally get like a 60-day special enrollment period to get covered. You can also go to the healthcare marketplace and you can get a special enrollment period. If you're terminated because the state does make a determination that you're over income, they're supposed to transfer you to the marketplace, get an application going. If they're not, you can still get a special enrollment period, but you just have to do a little bit more work. So our concerns: huge volume of renewals, addresses and circumstances change. This is the first renewal for many members. This is a lot for the workforce that needs to be done. We've already seen Maximus is in the news for very bad reasons right now, and they're the ones that are doing a lot of this work. Due process concerns and language access concerns are always big. The red tape that's going to come back eventually. The errors of notices, and then what's going to lead to sort of gaps in coverage, especially for HIP recipients. I think so. I'll just say this is a really great slide I borrowed from Jennifer Wagner from the Center for Budget Policy and Priority, talking about this sort of the 3 levels of people that we're concerned about. You can take a look at this after the words when I send the presentation out. And then finally, I included a bunch of resources for folks. If you want to look up rules, if you want to take a look at some of the things that might be helpful. I've also included Indiana Legal Services phone number for intake. I know I think there's at least a couple ILS folks on the call right now. But then information on how to represent yourself and navigate an appeal and that sort of thing. Probably the most important thing is this navigation help from the Covering Kids and Families. Highly recommend getting a navigator to go through this process.